Hi, I'm Dave Ternan, one of the co-founders and CEO of OrthoFi. Welcome to the Ortho at Scale webinar series. This is a new series geared towards executives and leaders across the orthodontic and dental support organizations. Through Ortho at Scale, we're going to be bringing together industry leaders to share data and discuss trends shaping orthodontics and explore practical strategies to build stronger organizations. Our goal is to provide actionable insights that help you to make better decisions and drive stronger business outcomes. To start the series, we're going to be focused on an important topic for practice growth. And we'll have three separate series. The first focusing on patient affordability, the second one about driving more production per start, and then the third about driving more patients and higher conversion. So with today's webinar, we're going to be focused on patient affordability. There's going to be three sections, one on more macro view of what the consumer is seeing in 2026, how that is showing up in the OrthoFi fleet, and then based on those findings, what is the right strategies to drive profitable growth? So to kick this off, we're going to focus on macro, and I'll turn it over to my co-host, Alex Moreno.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Alex Moreno, Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at OrthoFi. So to begin with, really looking at the chart on the left is really looking at two really important consumer trends. And what we've been seeing is movement in opposite directions. So, as we're seeing, household debt has increased, 4.64 million from 2019 to Q1 of 2026. And at the same time, the personal savings rate has seen a decline of 58%. And as we see with some of the peaks in 2021, the pandemic temporarily created some significant savings cushions for the consumer, which you will see reflected in that savings rate during 2020. But as we're seeing within the personal savings rate today, that cushion has largely disappeared while that household debt has continued to grow. And the key takeaway here is that consumers have not stopped spending, but they are increasingly evaluating major purchases based on monthly payment rather than the total cost. And, when we look at this from an orthodontic lens, it's really, for our practices is focusing at affordability is increasingly less about whether consumers can afford the total cost and more about whether the monthly payment fits within an already crowded household budget. And the next question is, not just whether consumers are carrying more debt, it is whether they still have enough financial cushion to handle an unexpected expense. So looking here, this bar chart measures the percentage of US adults who say they could cover a $400 unexpected expense with cash or its equivalent. And, the percentage peaked at 68% during 2021 when that pandemic era support and elevated savings provided consumers with more financial flexibility. But since then, that metric has returned to 63%, essentially back to that 2019 level. What this means is that more than one third of consumers may not have enough readily available cash to manage even a relatively modest unexpected expense without borrowing, delaying, adding another payment or changing their spending behavior. And, from an orthodontic lens, it's highly relevant because a large upfront down payment can compete with the same household funds needed for emergencies, bills, and other financial priorities. And the message is not that practices should eliminate down payments, but it's practices need enough flexibility to avoid making large upfront payments the only path to treatment, and patients should have options that allow them to balance upfront cash and monthly affordability based on their circumstances. And as consumers have less cash flexibility, we also want to recognize that delinquency pressure is increasing across several major household debt categories. So this chart compares serious delinquency flow across major consumer debt categories between 2019 and Q1 of 2026. And as we see here, credit card delinquency flow has increased 33.5%. Auto delinquency is, increasing 25.8%. That student loan delinquency flow is also elevated, increasing, to 10.86%. And even mortgage delinquency flow has increased from 1.1 to 1.48%. And the story is that not every consumer is high risk, but the story is that consumer financial stress is becoming more widespread, which is increasing the importance of matching payment flexibility to the patient's actual ability to repay. And as a result, businesses should not respond by becoming overly rigid or requiring more cash from every patient, because that could create some unnecessary barriers to converting. So instead, it's the response should be around intelligent flexibility via qualifying the patient, looking at appropriate down payment and term guardrails, and requiring strong payment methods where appropriate and actively monitoring that portfolio performance.
Great information, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. And just to recap what you just heard, I mean, you're obviously seeing a significant stress on consumers in 2026. Obviously, starting at 2029, we had some savings and some excess capacity through the pandemic, but that's all been eroded and potentially even worse than it was in the 2019. So with the increased debt, that's obviously competing for other purchase. It's creating more challenges for patients to be able to afford treatment and need to be looking at more monthly payments. Alex covered around there's still a large percentage of U.S. adults in the U.S. that cannot afford more than $400 expense, so need to be thinking about down payments. And really, if you think about that, it's helping to set up a stage of how to think about patient affordability as we move forward. So that was at the macro level, more about what the consumer is seeing in 2026. We at OrthoFi have an incredible data set, about 1,500 locations across the country, and we're able to monitor how the consumer is showing up across our fleet. So we're going to move into looking a little bit more as a deep dive into that fleet data and understanding what the consumer is telling us. And so one concept we wanted to introduce here is open choice. So at OrthoFi, one of the key aspects of the solution is what you see on the screen here is the payment slider. The payment slider allows a treatment coordinator to work with a patient to find a payment plan and down payment that works within their budget. So you first focus on what's the total cost of the investment in orthodontics, and then you quickly move to how much money can you put down today? How much can you afford to put down today to be able to lower your monthly payment? And so it has a slider here at the top that allows them to choose the down payment. As they choose the down payment, the monthly payment is changing below. They can also change the monthly payment. So ultimately, why this is important is we're allowing the patient to choose the down payment and the monthly payment. So what will be interesting to see is how have those trends changed over the years to understand what the patient is choosing to pay. Okay. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alex to go through what we're seeing in the OrthoFi fleet data across those years.
Thanks, Dave. So this line chart shows the average down payment we've seen per start, excluding pay in full patients from 2019 through 2026 year to date. And what's interesting is the average down payment rose from $661 in 2019 to a peak of $741 in 2021. And that increase aligned with the stronger consumer savings environment that we saw during the pandemic period. And since then, we actually have seen down payments decline steadily, reaching $673 in 2026 year to date. So from that 2021 high point to 2026, we've actually seen the average down payment decline 9.2%. And while the current average remains slightly above 2019, the broader trend is pretty clear in terms of patients are becoming less willing or less able to commit as much cash up front. And that directly connects to the macro trends that we saw earlier. I mean, consumers are carrying more debt, have less savings, and more than anything, have less capacity to absorb unexpected expenses. And as a result, what this tells us is that practices cannot rely largely on down payments as their primary cash flow strategy. The opportunity is to move from maximizing that initial down payment to optimizing a full payment architecture with appropriate down payments, clear monthly payment options, and targeted incentives for stronger upfront commitment and guardrails that are going to protect that portfolio collection quality. So while the average down payment is one important measure, the strongest overall indicator of upfront patient commitment is same-day cash, but especially the portion driven by patients who are paying in full. So this graph tracks the same-day cash percentage and pay in full percentage during the same date ranges we spoke to earlier, 2019 to 2026. And the lighter line represents our same-day cash trends, which did increase as we were seeing with the average down payment from 32 to 35.8% in 2021. And we have seen, once again, a steady decline to, just under 30% in 2026 year to date. And the darker line represents that pay in full percentage, which reached that peak of just over 27% in 2021 and has declined to, 22% in 2026 year to date. And pay in full is especially important because it's the largest driver of upfront cash for a practice, and a patient who pays in full provides immediate cash and eliminates future collection risk, which is going to improve the overall same-day cash and working capital for a practice. And the decline in both same-day cash and pay in fulls reflects increasing affordability pressure, and more patients are still moving forward with treatment, but fewer are able or willing to make the same level of upfront financial commitment that we saw during the stronger savings environment of 2021. And this is why same-day cash should remain really a core KPI for executives and teams and organizations across the country, because it shouldn't be viewed in isolation or, maximize this KPI at any cost, but it should be managed alongside conversion, what we're seeing in payment plan behavior, delinquency, and write-offs to ensure the practice is creating sustainable starts and balancing conversion, cash flow, and risk accordingly. So as upfront cash has softened, patients are increasingly using payment structure to make treatment fit within their monthly budgets. So the graph on the left shows our average payment plan length, excluding pay in full patient, and plans have actually remained relatively stable around 21 months for several years, but interestingly have had an increase to just over 22 months in 2026 year to date. And while it's a moderate increase in isolation and not excessive in terms of extension, but from 2021 to 2026, we also saw that average payment plan term, increase just in this last year, 1.1 months. And the graph on the right is also showing, what are we seeing from an average monthly payment? And that monthly payment increased over the long term from roughly $175 in 2019 to approximately just, $205 in 2026 year to date. And, while the monthly payment has, moderately peaked in 2025, it does remain well above some of the pre-pandemic levels. But together, when we look at these graphs, it's really showing how patients are absorbing higher treatment costs, and they're not doing so through significantly higher down payments. Instead, they're using a combination of slightly longer terms and higher monthly payments. And the important insight here is that affordability does not necessarily mean offering the lowest monthly payment possible or the lowest down payment possible. It's really, focused on giving patients a payment structure that is realistic, transparent, and manageable within their household budget while still protecting the practice's economics. And the next slide we're going to walk through is going to bring those trends together and show how those patients have really absorbed those higher out-of-pocket patient responsibilities without requiring, materially higher upfront cash. So this slide really brings together the key affordability trends that we've discussed. So since 2021, patient responsibility per start has increased, 10.7%. And at the same time, we saw that down payment per start trend of, decline of 9.2%. So the important finding here is that higher patient responsibility hasn't been offset by asking patients to pay more upfront cash. In fact, with that average upfront down payment decline, what we are seeing is patients are absorbing more of the treatment costs through that monthly payment structure and payment flexibility. So interestingly, that average monthly payment has increased, 10.8%. And, while we have seen those payment terms extend just over 1 month, the chart on the left is really showing that trend in net production per start has increased, about 12.8% up to 5283 in 2026. And it's demonstrating that practices do not have to reduce the treatment value or rely on deeper discounts to maintain that affordability. The right affordability design can help practices preserve case acceptance, protect treatment fee integrity, and create more realized production per patient relationship. And the strategic takeaway is that affordability should be designed and not solved by discounting or requiring that upfront cash.
Awesome. Thanks again, Alex. That's some great information around the OrthoFi fleet. So what was super interesting about that is you saw the macro trends are actually showing up in the OrthoFi fleet data with almost the same shapes in terms of the down payments and the monthly payments. The key takeaways that Alex said there is obviously the consumer is under stress in 2026, much differently than what people have gotten used to in 2021 and 2022. So as we move to now that we understand the macro trends and what we're seeing in the OrthoFi data, it's really like, what is the strategy for profitable growth? And so we're moving from a period of time where a lot of the questions that the patients were thinking was, can I afford treatment? And the new question that they're really focused on is, can I afford the monthly payment? And so that's what we're going to deep dive into. What is the strategy around making payments affordable for the patients that are under consumer stress there? So as we think about profitable growth, we really have three aspects that we're looking to optimize. And so there's conversion. So how many patients that you see you recommend treatment to actually convert to a patient. You have cash flow, as Alex was talking about. How much same day cash are you collecting at the time of the start? And how much risk are you taking on by extending payment plans to finance treatment? And so when we typically go into an orthodontic office, you kind of see the levers in this level. So you see conversion rate, pretty good conversion rate. The practice likely trying to get a good amount of cash up front, so a little bit higher on cash, and trying to maintain the risk on the lower side, so not really extending treatment there. And so you see the higher cash and the lower is depressing conversion. If a practice says, you know what, I want to grow and I want to get as high conversion as I can offer zero down, $100 per month out into the future. So you could uh, increase conversion to the max. What happens to cash flow? Obviously goes down if you're not collecting as much upfront. So your same day cash is significantly lower. And if you're extending payments well out into the future, you're potentially increasing your risk here. If a practice says, you know what, I'm worried about the consumer and I want to get as much cash up front and limit as much risk as I possibly can, either through higher down payments and shorter plans or potentially even a third party financing, what we see is your cash goes up, your risk goes down, but your conversion significantly is impacted because you're asking patients, stressed consumers, to put more down and pay over a shorter period of time. And so what we believe is the right strategy is optimize. So instead of maximize one of them, you want to optimize. And we really believe we want to lean forward a little bit more on conversion. Obviously, one of our taglines at OrthoFi is start more smiles. So we're focused on converting more patients. We want to get the right balance of cash flow to be able to support operations, and you want to take on a little bit of risk. The risk is relatively low given orthodontics treatment. And so we're going to deep dive into how to optimize those three things as you move forward here. And so, as I mentioned earlier, open choice, giving the patients the ability to find a plan that works for them with down payments and monthly payments is really important right now. But we believe open choice needs to have guardrails in place to be able to optimize those three competing forces. So first, we want to give meaningful financial options for low down payments and low monthlies for the patient to be able to increase conversion. We want to use incentives in correct ways to incentivize them to put more cash down or potentially keep things shorter. And then we want to make sure that we're putting guardrails, smart guardrails in place to ensure that you're not extending risk too much or not getting enough cash. So smart guardrails. And if you're able to do that, you're actually to have balanced outcome, which is getting the right amount of conversion, cash flow, and risk with your payment plans that you have. So let's dive a little deeper into conversion. So we've talked a lot about down payments, what we're seeing in the industry, the macro industry, and also in the OrthoFi fleet, and then monthly payments. And so here on the left here, the is the average down payments in 2026 by credit tier. So we do a soft credit check and tier patients into six different tiers, one being high credit, six being lower. What's probably not unexpected is by tier, the higher credit tiers do put more down than the lower tiers. So these are the average payments across that. So we'll talk more about strategy with down payments in a second. If you look to the right here, you have the average monthly payments by credit tier. So the same six credit tiers, higher credit tiers, and lower tiers. What's super interesting about the monthly payments is it's relatively the same. So if you're looking at the top three tiers being in the 195 to 199 range, and then the bottom tiers being in the 205 to 210 range, almost difference between those is only $10 per month. So obviously, regardless of credit tier, people are looking for monthly affordability. So let's talk a little bit about strategies to think about in terms of offering down payment. So first and foremost, when you look at this slide, you think, the I could charge more to the higher credit tier patients or have them put more down. But just because you're higher credit doesn't mean that you have more money. High credit means you're actually good at paying bills, right? So you still want to have flexibility even for the higher credit tiers to be able to have them be able to afford and start treatment with that lower downs. If you look at this, these are averages. So there's some that are higher, some that are lower. But really what this is telling you is you need to be able to have plans to get well below $500 if you really want to move conversion rate. If some of the mistakes that we see some practices do is for conversion is if they're looking to get all of their lab bill from an Invisalign or some other treatment all up front. So say they're charging $1,000 or $1,500 down, that is going to be immediately friction in stopping people from being able to start. So if you remember, a large portion of the US adult population not able to afford a $400 unexpected treatment. So if you're expecting them to put $1,000 down, they're not going to be able to do that, and that's going to be a non-starter for them, and they're going to not be able to start treatment with you. This is particularly important in the adult cases. So sometimes with kids, the parents know the treatment's coming up, so they're save money for that type of thing. But with adults, it's a little bit more whimsical. They decide that I want to start treatment. I saw somebody else using Invisalign. I saw somebody else with braces. I'm going to think about it. They go to the orthodontist, and if you put $1,000 or $1,500, they're going to say no and most likely not come back. So it's really important, especially for adults. From a monthly affordability, the thing that you can see here is obviously some are higher and some are lower. Really getting that monthly payment below $200 is the sweet spot, or even lower down to 180, 190 is where you need to be. If you're a higher end, higher cost orthodontic with doing premium treatment fees, if you're charging 6,500 for comprehensive treatment, if you think about a 200, 880 or $200 payment, that is well over 30 months to be able to make those payments. So we really suggest extending past treatment length to be able to get to below that $200 per month. I know there's a lot of anxiety around extending treatment, extending payment plans past treatment because there is a fear of people stopping paying after the patient leaves treatment. What we've seen with hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of starts, is that patients do pay after treatment. It's really about getting to a monthly plan or payment that fits within their budget. If they do that, they will continue to pay even after past treatment. And then if they happen to not pay at the end in month 32 and month 33, you've collected already 95% of your treatment fee. So the write-off percentage is really, really small. So the avoiding of risk of there is not worth the decrease in conversion is our perspective on that. So as we talk about open choice and giving patients the opportunity to choose their down payments and choose their monthly payments, everyone is afraid well, everybody's going to choose the lowest down payment, zero down, $100 per month. And with open choice across a million, almost 2 million starts, we have not seen that. What you see here is these are the down payments that patients have chose, and this is the monthly payments that they chose. And so each dot is a patient. And so what's crazy about this is if you look at these dots, some of these are you would never expect. They're a little crazy, right? So if you think about this right here, this is a patient that chose to put $4,000 down and chose $75 per month. Who would have ever designed something around $4,000 and 75 per month? Absolutely not. But you never know. Like maybe grandma or grandpa gave them $4,000 to start treatment and they have that, and then the rest they need to make affordable and they want it to be $75 per month, right? And so you really never know what's in the head of the patient. A good treatment coordinator will be able to have conversations and get to those things. But if you think of for an OSO or DSO at scale across 50 to 100 locations and hundreds of patients per day, it's hard to get that conversation at that scale to be able to be consistent. And so that's why open choice is so important. So typically, a typical practice that we see their payment plans that they want to offer to patients will typically fit within this oval. So you'll typically have a pay in full option. You'll have a high down payment, low monthly, or you'll have a lower down payment, higher monthly is really the three options that are typically presented. And they typically fall within those things. So if you're only offering those limited treatments, you're missing out on patients being able to select all these other dots, right? All these other things. And so you think about it, what people are most anxious about is what about these dots here that are the low payments and the low monthly payments, right? And so if you look at it more at a portfolio level across the practice and think about all of the patients, to be able to offset the cash flow and the risk from these, you can use all of the patients that are choosing these plans here. So you're using these to help fund these ones. And the ones in the red zone, if you didn't offer those low payments, they likely did not start. So that's the optimizing conversion rate. And so when you do this balance and you're using opportunity to leverage the patients up above to fund the patients below, it does give you a very balanced cash flow. And so what we see across the fleet is a high pay in full percentage and a same day cash of almost $1,350. And so if you think of your lab bill being $1,200 to $1,400, with this open choice, you're getting enough to cover a lab bill if every single person used Invisalign, and we know that's not the case. So you're getting enough cash to be able to fund all of the upfront lab bills with this open choice, and you're optimizing conversion rate and making sure that you get enough cash flow. So as we move on to continue to talk deep dive into open choice, this is one of my favorite slides that we've put together. And this is really showing what is the pay in full and the down payments when a patient selects a plan in the office on the payment slider in the office with the treatment coordinator, and what they select when they're at home. And so just for context there, if a patient does not select a payment plan, we will send the payment slider home through an email and a text, and then mom and dad or the patient can be able to view their plans and select the plans that work for them in the comfort of their home on a Friday evening, maybe having a glass of wine and thinking about their financing. So the blue bar is what they select in the office, and the green bar is what they select at home. So what's interesting about that is you see that there's actually more pay in fulls at home, and there's higher down payments at home, right? So same consumer, really, a difference in the office and at home. And the real difference that we found is the presence of the treatment coordinator in the office is the difference. And treatment coordinators are great at getting conversion and they're great at in helping with patients, but they do influence the sale. Either they're not fully giving the patient the opportunity to choose by their controlling the slider, or maybe they're influencing it with comments of like, Well, I mean, you don't need to put that much down, or maybe you don't, you don't want to go out as far as that with that payment plan, and that ends up influencing that. So it's super interesting to say like open choice, true open choice, which is them selecting at home, actually gives you better cash results than typically when you do it in office. So something to keep in mind as you think about how to have the conversations around financing in the office there. So. So the next thing we've talked about conversion and we talked about cash flow. It is an important piece is how to balance risk. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Alex to go through the risk portion of this.
Thanks, Dave. And this line outlines what we see as the operating model at OrthoFi for intelligent flexibility, and that is, first starting with qualifying and then the structure and really monitoring what we see as the competing factors between conversion, cash flow, and risk. And when we talk about qualifying, as our first step at OrthoFi, this starts with a soft medical credit check, but even without a soft credit check, practices can still utilize a review of the patient's risk profile or payment history where available. And the goal is not to make treatment inaccessible, but it's really to understand the appropriate level of flexibility for that patient. And that's where we look really diving into the structure and how those payment plans are set up. So based on that patient's risk or that consumer's risk profile, practices can establish, different minimum down payments, maximum payment plan terms, 0% interest finance charge guardrails, and, even layering in across all of them, the mandatory need for auto pays on file. And, within this model, you can see that lower risk patients may qualify for more flexibility, while those higher risk patients may require stronger upfront cash commitment or tighter repayment terms. And, more than anything, while qualifying and structure are going to be key areas and guardrails, the key piece is in monitoring the performance of those competing factors. And, practices should continue to monitor conversion rate, same day cash. What are you seeing from an average payment plan length and average monthly payment? And then those finance charges and how well those may be offsetting your delinquency over 30 or write-offs together. And the key message is that the right flexibility must be matched to the right patient, and flexibility should be earned, structured, and monitored because it is going to create more paths to treatment while still protecting the practice's working capital cash flow and portfolio collection quality. And the next slide here is where I'm really going to look at the, collections performance alone isn't just driven by that credit quality and structure. Operational discipline has just as much of a meaningful impact as well. So this scatter plot compares, what we see across our OrthoFi fleet of locations, their average credit rating with the write-off percentage. And each dot here represents a location across our fleet and portfolio practices that we serve. And as expected, the trend line slopes downward because locations with stronger credit profiles generally do have lower write-offs. But when we look at the green dots, those are qualified locations that have demonstrated best practices across, key important areas and are outperforming the expected write-off levels, regardless of the credit profile, with stronger operational discipline and, even when serving patients with similar or even lower credit quality. And, what this analysis identified was four operational variables that are most strongly associated with lower write-offs, excluding credit score. And the first is on, what we here at OrthoFi call our optimized configuration. But as we've talked about through our webinar today, it's a structured financial configuration that's going to set the minimum downs, payment plan term lengths, and, what we here at OrthoFi call, trusting the slider and not changing those guardrails. As we're talking through here today, it's staying within those guardrails. You're building that structure for a reason and continue to follow the structure terms that you have set in place and not overriding the terms that you have. And, most importantly, from a collection effort standpoint, is ensuring that you have a valid cell phone on file, as well as you have auto pay enrollment across the payment plan, active payment plans that you're working in. What we've seen is within our fleet performance, when a location performs better than the median across all four of these areas, write-offs have improved more than 30%. And that difference is definitely meaningful. I mean, we definitely pride ourselves on the fleet average write-off rate at, 2.75%, but even more so in terms of how our practices and clients collaborate with our teams to ensure that they're following those practices to even achieve a stronger write-off rate of only 1.61%. Now, the central message here is that collections performance isn't just driven by process, not just by patient quality, but that credit quality matters. And practices can materially improve those outcomes through those disciplines structured. And, more than anything, what we're going to go through here is that strong setup reduces risk before the first payment is due. But the next most important area is the consistent collections protocol, once a payment is missed. So, as we look here, payment flexibility alone is only going to work when it's supported by a consistent and disciplined collections process. And what this timeline represents is OrthoFi's 180-day collection protocol that really begins on the first failed payment through, full collections or, an account write-off. And the goal here is to intervene early, communicate consistently across multiple communication sources, whether it be text message or phone call, email, and escalate deliberately before those balances become unmanageable. And in the early stage, we here at OrthoFi look at beginning on day zero. So the focus is on resolving a missed payment quickly through, automated card retries or ACH notification. And then once we've gone through that, it's really communicating via text messages, emails, and phone calls, and continually attempting some of those redraft opportunities. And at this point, the priority is patient communication as we get deeper through that collection protocol and restoring the account before that delinquency continues to grow. And as the account ages, the process becomes more structured. And this is why we see by approximately day 45, we do see that practices should get actively involved in, the patient's exam to be able to drive, a resolution at that point in time. Because what we've seen is when patients go more than, two invoices or 60 days over, the likelihood to collect on that contract principal drops around, 60%. And, more than anything, it's always driving that consistency, but ensuring that you're not continuing to render services for patients that are not actually, continuing to pay for the contracts that they signed up for. And, when we start to look at day 90, day 121, and day 181, it's really looking as, ensuring that the practice is completing and running a standard dismissal and write-off process for accounts that remain unresolved. And, timely write-offs are not a failure of collections. They're an important financial discipline decision that practices have to continue because holding aged, uncollectible balances on the books will continue to distort AR performance and delay accurate bad debt and write-off reporting that, are the key monitoring areas that should drive back to modifying your structured plans and, really utilizing that and consuming those against the operating principles that we spoke to earlier. Because as those balances continue to age without write-off, they are not just sitting on the balance sheet, but also consuming operational resources that should be focused on recoverable accounts.
Awesome. Thanks for covering that, Alex. So as we wrap up here, I think the key things to again take away are the consumer is much more stressed in 2026 than it was in 2021 and 2022. So we need to think differently about how to make it affordable and be able to allow to patients to be able to start treatment. So what we've discussed in this is some strategies around designing things differently, using open choice to find ways to make treatment affordable from a low down payment and a monthly payment. We also strongly encourage to have the right guardrails and the right governance over there. So applying credit tiered guardrails based on the creditworthiness of the patient, and then making sure that there is good discipline, as Alex talked about, in terms of how you set up the patient, making sure you have the right information, and also the auto payment on file will get you the best results. And then importantly, ensuring that you measure the results here and continue to adjust. So monitoring the conversion rate, the same day cash, the write-off, and continuing to adjust. So, with those strategies in place, you can still make treatment affordable, increase your conversion rate, and grow profitably. So those are the key takeaways that I hope you all take away from today. So thank you all for being a part of the first Ortho at Scale webinar. Appreciate you being a part of this. We do have two other webinars focused on practice growth, so increasing production per start, and then also increasing new patient exams and increasing conversion rate. So we look forward to bringing those to you here in the near future. If you do like to get a hold of us and discuss opportunities for us to partner together to drive practice growth, you do have the contact information here of someone that can collaborate with you if OrthoFi and some of the solutions are right for your organization. So look forward to seeing you all on the next webinar series sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.